The tears cascading down Jillian Danvers' face glistened in the harsh afternoon sun as she sat alone on the wooden bench beside the small, whitewashed chapel, her wedding dress billowing around her like a deflated dream. The year was 1875, and in the frontier town of Silver Creek, Colorado, being left at the altar was worse than death. It was a promise of lifelong shame. The chapel bell had stopped ringing an hour ago. The guests had shuffled away, their whispers trailing behind them like venomous snakes. Her father had stormed off in rage, her mother in tears. Even the preacher had abandoned her with a sympathetic pat on the shoulder and words that meant nothing. Edward Thompson, her fiancé of 2 years, had simply never arrived. The sun beat down mercilessly, making the beads on her dress sparkle with cruel irony. Jillian had spent months hand sewing those beads, each one a tiny promise of the future she thought she'd have. Now they mocked her, weighing her down as heavily as her heart. Her bouquet of wildflowers wilted in her lap, petals dropping onto the dirt at her feet. "Miss, are you all right?" The deep voice startled her, and Jillian looked up through tear-blurred eyes. A tall figure blocked the sun, casting her in shadow. As her vision cleared, she made out a man astride a chestnut stallion, dust from the trail still clinging to his clothes. His face was partially hidden beneath the brim of a weather-beaten hat, but she could see concern etched into the lines around his eyes. "Do I look all right to you, sir?" She replied, her voice cracking with emotion. The stranger dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent more time on horseback than on foot. He approached cautiously, as one might a wounded animal. His boots kicked up small clouds of dust as he stopped a respectful distance away. "No, madam, you surely don't," he said honestly, "and it appears someone's got a lot to answer for." Jillian laughed bitterly. "My former fiancé, has apparently found better things to do than marry me today." The stranger removed his hat, revealing a full head of dark hair with strands of copper when the sunlight hit it just right. His eyes, she noticed, were an unusual shade of green, like spring grass after rain. He couldn't have been much older than her 22 years, perhaps 26 or 27, but his eyes held the wisdom of someone who had seen much of life. "Isaac Xavier," he introduced himself with a slight bow. "Recently of nowhere in particular and headed somewhere new." Despite herself, Jillian felt a small smile tug at her lips. "Jillian Danvers, recently of the altar and headed nowhere at all." Isaac's expression softened. No one should be left alone on what was meant to be their happiest day. He extended his hand. "May I?" Jillian hesitated, years of propriety warring with the raw emptiness in her chest. Then, with a defiance born of abandonment, she placed her gloved hand in his. "Why not? I've already scandalized the entire town." With gentle strength, he pulled her to her feet. The action sent a cascade of wilted petals to the ground around them. "Your horse seems strong enough for two," she observed, eyeing the chestnut stallion who watched them with intelligent eyes. Isaac's eyebrows shot up. "Miss Danvers, are you suggesting that you help me escape the most humiliating day of my life?" "Yes, Mr. Xavier, I believe I am." A recklessness she'd never known herself capable of surged through her veins. "Unless you're opposed to a bit of scandal yourself." A slow smile spread across his face, creasing the corners of those grass-green eyes. "I've never much cared for other people's opinions, Miss Danvers, but I must warn you, I'm not the type of man your father would approve of." "My father," Jillian said, gathering her skirts, "has lost the right to approve or disapprove of anything in my life as of approximately 2 hours ago, when he told me I should have tried harder to make Edward want to marry me." Isaac's jaw tightened momentarily. "Then I believe Samson and I would be honored to escort you away from here." He gestured to his horse. "Samson?" she asked. "Strongest creature I know," he said, patting the horse's neck, "and the most reliable." Isaac helped her mount, her wedding dress bunching awkwardly around her legs. She'd never ridden astride before ladies rode side saddle, but today was a day for breaking rules. He swung up behind her, one arm securely around her waist. "Where to, Miss Danvers?" His voice was close to her ear, sending an unexpected shiver down her spine. Jillian looked back at the chapel where her dreams had died and felt something new stirring in their place, something that felt dangerously like hope. "Anywhere," she whispered. "Anywhere but here." With a click of his tongue, Isaac urged Samson forward, and they rode away from Silver Creek, the dust of the road swirling behind them like the pages of a story being rewritten. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, following the winding road that led away from town and into the sprawling landscape of the Colorado Territory. The vastness of the open country gradually began to soothe Jillian's raw nerves, the rhythm of the horse's gait lulling her into a strange calm. "I should tell you," Isaac finally spoke, "I'm headed for Willow Springs. It's about 2 days' ride from here." Jillian nodded, suddenly aware of the impropriety of her impulsive decision. "I have an aunt who lives in Clearwater. It's on the way to Willow Springs." "Is that where you'd like me to take you?" His tone was neutral, offering her an honorable exit from their arrangement. The thought of facing her aunt, her mother's older sister, who had warned her against marrying Edward, made Jillian's stomach clench. The inevitable "I told you so" would be more than she could bear. "Not yet," she admitted. "Perhaps tomorrow. I can't face anyone's pity tonight." Isaac was silent for a moment. "There's a trading post about an hour ahead. The owner, Mrs. Holloway, is a good woman." "She might put us up for the night." "Us?" Jillian asked, suddenly self-conscious of how this all must appear. "I won't leave you alone, Miss Danvers," he said firmly. "Not until you're safely with family or wherever you choose to be." The sincerity in his voice warmed something in her chest. "Thank you." As they continued, Jillian became aware of the growing discomfort of her formal dress. The corset beneath it dug into her ribs with each of Samson's steps, and the weight of the beaded fabric was becoming unbearable in the afternoon heat. "May I ask what brings you to these parts, Mr. Xavier?" she asked, trying to distract herself. "Isaac, please," he requested. "And it's a long story involving a cattle sale gone wrong, a stolen horse that wasn't actually stolen, and an unfortunate misunderstanding with a banker's daughter." Jillian couldn't help the laugh that escaped her lips. "That sounds considerably more interesting than my story." "I doubt that," he said. "Not many men are foolish enough to leave a woman like you waiting at the altar. There must be more to that tale." The casual compliment caught her off guard. "Edward is from one of the wealthiest families in Silver Creek. My father owns the mercantile. It was a good match on paper." "But not in heart?" Isaac asked perceptively. Jillian sighed. "I thought it was. We'd known each other since childhood. He was steady, reliable." She laughed bitterly. "Or so I believed." "Sometimes people aren't who we think they are," Isaac said, his voice carrying a weight that suggested personal experience. "And who are you, Isaac Xavier?" she asked boldly. "Besides a man who rescues abandoned brides." She felt rather than saw his smile. "A wanderer, a sometime cowhand, a man who's made mistakes and tried to learn from them." "That's not very specific," she observed. "No, it isn't," he agreed, "but it's honest." They lapsed into another comfortable silence, the landscape gradually changing as they moved farther from town. The flat plains gave way to rolling hills dotted with scrubby pine trees. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, casting everything in a golden glow. By the time they reached the trading post, the sky was painted in brilliant oranges and pinks. Mrs. Holloway was indeed a good woman, as Isaac had promised. The older woman took one look at Jillian in her bedraggled wedding dress and ushered her inside with motherly concern, asking no questions beyond whether she was hungry and tired. The trading post doubled as a small inn for travelers, with 2 spare rooms above the store. Mrs. Holloway provided Jillian with a simple cotton nightgown and dress for the morning, along with a basin of warm water and soap. "That young man of yours is sleeping in the barn," Mrs. Holloway informed her as she helped Jillian out of her wedding dress. "Insisted on it, though I told him we had another room." "He's not Jillian began, then stopped, unsure how to explain their unusual arrangement. Mrs. Holloway's eyes were kind but knowing. "Whatever he is or isn't to you, dearie, he's a gentleman. Not many of those left out here." Later, after washing away the dust and tears of the day, Jillian stood at the small window of her room, looking out at the barn where Isaac was spending the night. A lantern glowed softly from within. She wondered what kind of man would go so far out of his way for a stranger in distress. She thought back to Edward, to his perfectly combed hair and immaculate suits, to his calculated smiles and the way his eyes would wander when she spoke of things that didn't interest him. She had mistaken his polish for substance, his family name for character. Isaac Xavier was different. There was an openness to him, a directness that felt refreshing after years of navigating Silver Creek's social expectations. He had seen her at her worst abandoned, heartbroken, desperate, and had offered help without judgment. It was a dangerous thought, finding comfort in a stranger's kindness on the very day she was meant to become another man's wife. But as Jillian crawled into bed, she found herself wondering what tomorrow would bring with a curiosity that felt suspiciously like anticipation. Morning came with the sound of roosters crowing and the smell of coffee brewing. Jillian dressed quickly in the simple blue cotton dress Mrs. Holloway had provided. It was plainer than anything she'd worn in years, but surprisingly comfortable. She braided her long brown hair into a single plait and made her way downstairs. Isaac was already at the kitchen table, deep in conversation with Mrs. Holloway. He stood when Jillian entered, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. In the clear morning light, she could see him properly for the first time. His face was tanned from the sun, with the beginnings of stubble darkening his jaw. A small scar cut through his right eyebrow, and when he smiled, a dimple appeared in his left cheek. "Good morning," he said. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I expected to," she admitted. "Thank you for arranging everything." Mrs. Holloway bustled around, setting a plate of eggs and bacon before Jillian. "You two eat up now. Long road ahead, I expect." Over breakfast, they discussed their plans for the day. Clearwater was still a full day's ride away. "We could make it by nightfall if we push hard," Isaac said, "but it would be rough going." "I don't mind," Jillian said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. The prospect of another day in Isaac's company was not unwelcome. As they prepared to leave, Jillian tried to pay Mrs. Holloway for her hospitality, but the woman refused. "That's not necessary, dearie. Just promise you'll stop by if you're ever passing through again." She pressed a small package into Jillian's hands, some food for the journey. Isaac had already saddled Samson and was loading their few belongings. Jillian's wedding dress was carefully folded and tucked into one of his saddlebags. "You don't have to bring that," she said, nodding toward the dress. "It's yours," he said simply, "and it's beautiful despite everything." The observation made her throat tight with emotion. She had loved that dress, had dreamed of the day she would wear it since she was a little girl. Now it was a painful reminder, but somehow, Isaac's acknowledgement of its beauty made it feel less like a symbol of failure. They set off as the sun was fully rising, the day promising to be clear and warm. Riding was easier today. Jillian was more comfortable with Isaac's presence behind her, with the steady strength of his arm around her waist when the terrain required it. "Tell me about Clearwater," Isaac said as they rode. "What can I expect from this aunt of yours?" Jillian thought about Aunt Martha, with her no-nonsense attitude and her unexpected kindness. "She's formidable," she said honestly. "She never married, runs her own boarding house, and doesn't suffer fools gladly. She'll probably scold me for being impulsive, then feed me until I can barely move." "She sounds like a woman worth knowing," Isaac remarked. "She is. She taught me to read Shakespeare when my father thought it would give me ideas above my station." Jillian smiled at the memory. "She believes women should be educated, independent." "And what do you believe, Jillian Danvers?" he asked, using her first name for the first time. The way he said it made it sound different somehow, more meaningful. "I believe." She started, then paused, realizing she'd never really been asked before. I believe I've spent too much of my life trying to be what others wanted me to be. Isaac nodded, though she couldn't see him. That's a hard lesson to learn, some never do. What about you? She asked. What brings you to Willow Springs, the truth this time? He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. I'm looking for someone, he finally said. My brother, we lost touch some years back. Last I heard, he was in Willow Springs. There was a story there, Jillian sensed, something painful. I hope you find him. So do I, he said softly. The day progressed, the landscape changing around them. They stopped at midday by a small stream to rest Samson and eat some of the food Mrs. Holloway had provided. Sitting on a fallen log, sharing bread and cheese and dried apple slices, Jillian felt a strange sense of freedom she'd never experienced before. I've never done anything like this, she confessed, just gone somewhere without planning every detail. Isaac smiled. There's a certain appeal to not knowing what's around the next bend in the road. Is that why you wander? She asked. For the appeal of the unknown, he considered this. Partly, and partly because standing still means facing things I'd rather not face. Like your brother, she guessed. Isaac nodded, his eyes on the stream. Jacob and I, we had different ideas about life. He wanted to settle down, build something lasting. I was always looking for the next adventure. A wistful expression crossed his face. Our parents died when we were young. He practically raised me. Then 5 years ago, we had a fight. I said things I regret. He did too. I left, and when I came back a month later, he was gone. 5 years is a long time, Jillian said gently. Too long, Isaac agreed. That's why I need to find him, to make things right if I can. As they continued their journey, Jillian found herself sharing stories from her own life, her childhood in Silver Creek. Her dreams of traveling to places like New York or San Francisco, her love of books that transported her to worlds beyond her own. Isaac was a good listener, asking questions that showed he was genuinely interested in her answers. In return, he told her about the places he'd been, the vastness of the Montana Territory, the rugged beauty of the Rockies, the endless horizons of the plains. By late afternoon, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. We should find shelter, Isaac said, surveying the sky with concern. That looks like it could be a bad one. They were still several hours from Clearwater, with nothing but open country around them. Isaac urged Samson to a faster pace, looking for any sign of shelter. Just as the first fat raindrops began to fall, they spotted a small cabin set back from the road. Looks abandoned, Isaac observed as they approached. The cabin was weathered but still intact, its door hanging slightly ajar. They dismounted quickly, Isaac leading Samson to a lean-to attached to the side of the cabin while Jillian hurried inside to escape the increasingly heavy rain. The cabin was indeed abandoned but surprisingly clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and simple furniture, a table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed filled the single room. Isaac joined her moments later, water dripping from his hat and coat. Samson settled, he reported. This place has been empty for a while, but it seems sound enough. The rain was coming down in sheets now, drumming on the roof and cascading off the eaves. Thunder rolled across the sky and lightning flashed, illuminating the cabin in brief, stark bursts of light. Looks like we'll be here for a while, Isaac said, removing his wet coat and hanging it near the door. I'll get a fire started. While he worked at the fireplace, Jillian explored the cabin, finding a small store of dry firewood stacked against the back wall and some basic supplies in a cupboard: coffee, beans, and salt, all still sealed in their containers. By the time Isaac had a fire crackling in the hearth, the storm had settled into a steady downpour that showed no signs of letting up soon. The cabin grew warm and surprisingly cozy as the flames cast dancing shadows on the walls. We should reach Clearwater by mid-morning tomorrow, weather permitting, Isaac said, accepting the cup of coffee Jillian had brewed using the supplies they'd found. She nodded, suddenly reluctant to think about their journey ending. In the short time they'd been traveling together, Isaac had become. What? Not quite a friend, but something more than a stranger. Someone who had seen her at her most vulnerable and treated her with kindness and respect. They sat side by side near the fire, listening to the rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. The situation being alone in an abandoned cabin with a man she'd known for barely a day should have scandalized Jillian. Instead, she felt oddly at peace. "What will you do after you find your brother?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Isaac stared into the fire. "I haven't thought that far ahead, make amends hopefully after that," he shrugged. "Continue on, I suppose, there's always another horizon." "That sounds lonely," Jillian observed. "It can be," he admitted. "But there's a freedom to it too. No expectations except your own." Jillian thought about Silver Creek, about the life that had been planned for her since childhood marriage to someone suitable, children, a house in town, Sunday socials and church picnics. A life dictated by others' expectations. "I envy that sometimes," she said softly, "the freedom to choose your own path." Isaac looked at her then, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "What would you choose if you could, if there were no expectations, no obligations?" It was a question she'd never allowed herself to consider fully. "I'd want to see more of the world before deciding where to settle," she said slowly, thinking it through. "I'd want to experience things for myself instead of just reading about them in books." "Like what?" he prompted. "I'd want to see the ocean," she said, warming to the subject. "To watch the sunrise over mountains, to dance under the stars without worrying about who might see." She smiled, a little embarrassed by her own dreams. "Simple things, I suppose, but they're mine." "They're not simple at all," Isaac said, his voice gentle. "They're beautiful." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of something shared. Jillian looked away first, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, of the intimacy of the small cabin with the storm raging outside. "We should get some rest," she said, her voice not quite steady. "It's been a long day." Isaac nodded, standing up. "You take the bed, I'll make do here by the fire." Jillian wanted to protest the bed was barely big enough for one person, and the floor looked hard and uncomfortable, but she knew it was the proper arrangement. Still, as she lay in the narrow bed later, listening to the rain and aware of Isaac's presence just a few feet away, she felt a curious mixture of emotions she couldn't quite name. In 2 days, her life had been completely upended. The future she had planned had vanished, and in its place was. What uncertainty, yes, but also possibility. For the first time, she felt as though she was writing her own story, not following one written for her by others. And Isaac Xavier, with his green eyes and his wounded heart searching for his brother, had somehow become a part of that story. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it filled her with a strange, quiet anticipation as she drifted off to sleep with the sound of rain on the roof and the warmth of the fire Isaac had built. Morning arrived with cleared skies and a freshness to the air that only comes after a storm. Jillian awoke to find Isaac already up, tending to Samson outside. The sight of him through the cabin window, his movements easy and confident as he brushed down the horse, brought an unbidden smile to her face. They set off shortly after sunrise, the landscape washed clean by the rain. The roads were muddy in places but passable, and Samson seemed refreshed after his night of rest. Jillian was acutely aware that with each mile they were getting closer to Clearwater, to Aunt Martha's boarding house, and to the moment when she and Isaac would part ways. "Do you ever get tired of it?" she asked as they rode. The wandering, the constant movement. Isaac was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes," he admitted. "There are nights when I look up at the stars and wonder what it would be like to have a place to call my own, people waiting for me to come home." "Why don't you?" she asked. "Settle down somewhere." "Never found the right reason, I suppose," he said, "or the right person to settle down for." The words hung in the air between them, full of possibility. Jillian's heart beat a little faster, and she was glad he couldn't see her face. They reached Clearwater just before noon. It was larger than Silver Creek, a proper town with several streets radiating out from a central square. Aunt Martha's boarding house was on the eastern edge, a three-story building with a wide porch and neat flower beds out front. As they approached, Jillian felt a curious reluctance. What had seemed like the obvious destination yesterday now felt like an ending she wasn't ready for. "This is it," she said as Isaac brought Samson to a halt in front of the boarding house. "Thank you for everything, Isaac. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." He dismounted first, then helped her down, his hands strong and sure at her waist. For a moment they stood close, neither quite ready to let go. "Jillian," he began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with words. The front door of the boarding house swung open, and a tall woman with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun stepped onto the porch. Aunt Martha's sharp eyes took in the scene before her. Jillian in a borrowed dress, standing too close to a trail-worn cowboy, and her eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "Jillian Elizabeth Danvers," she called, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "This is a surprise." Jillian stepped away from Isaac, smoothing her dress nervously. "Hello, Aunt Martha. I hope you don't mind the unexpected visit." "That depends entirely on the explanation that comes with it," her aunt replied dryly, "and on who your companion might be." Isaac stepped forward, hat in hand. "Isaac Xavier, madam. I had the honor of escorting your niece from Silver Creek." Martha's keen eyes assessed him. "I see. And does this unexpected journey have anything to do with the wedding that was scheduled for yesterday?" Jillian felt her cheeks flush. "It's a rather long story." "I imagine it is." Martha's gaze softened slightly. "Well, don't stand there in the dirt. Come inside, both of you, and tell me everything over lunch." Isaac hesitated. "I should probably be on my way, madam. Willow Springs is still a half-day's ride, and nonsense," Martha interrupted. "You look like you could use a proper meal and a rest before continuing your journey. Besides, I want to hear exactly how you came to be in my niece's company." There was no arguing with Aunt Martha when she used that tone. Soon they were seated at her kitchen table, plates of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread before them. Between bites, Jillian explained everything: Edward's absence, her abandonment at the chapel, Isaac's timely arrival, and their journey to Clearwater. Martha listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When Jillian finished, she turned her attention to Isaac. "So you're looking for your brother in Willow Springs," she said. "Jacob Xavier, was it?" Isaac nodded, surprised she had remembered the detail from Jillian's story. Martha's next words took them both by surprise. "No need to go to Willow Springs. Jacob Xavier lives right here in Clearwater, has done for the past 3 years. Isaac's fork clattered against his plate. "He's here in Clearwater?" "Owns the smithy on Main Street," Martha confirmed. "Good man, good craftsman. Married a local girl 2 years back. They have a little one now, just turned 1 last month." Jillian watched as emotions played across Isaac's face: shock, disbelief, hope. "You're certain it's him?" he asked, his voice rough with feeling. "Unless there are 2 Jacob Xaviers with the same unusual green eyes as yours, yes, I'm certain," Martha said. "Clearwater isn't so big that I don't know most everyone in it." Isaac looked stunned. 5 years of searching, and his brother had been here in this small town, building a life, becoming a husband and father. "I need to see him," he said, half rising from his chair. "Finish your meal first," Martha advised. "He'll still be there in an hour, and you'll think more clearly with food in your stomach." Reluctantly, Isaac sat back down, though Jillian could see he was struggling to contain his emotions. Under the table, she reached out and squeezed his hand briefly, offering what comfort she could. After lunch, Martha insisted on showing Jillian to a room where she could rest and freshen up. "Your young man can find the smithy on his own," she said. "It's just 3 blocks down, can't miss it. You look like you could use some time to yourself." "He's not Jillian began, then stopped at Martha's knowing look. "We barely know each other," she said instead. "Sometimes it doesn't take long to recognize what's important," her aunt replied cryptically. "Now, there's a dress in the wardrobe that should fit you. Rest a bit, then come down when you're ready." Alone in the neat guest room, Jillian sat on the edge of the bed, trying to sort through her jumbled thoughts. Isaac would be reuniting with his brother right now, finding the family he'd been searching for. What did that mean for her? For them? There was no them, she reminded herself sternly. Isaac had been kind, yes, considerate and respectful. There had been moments when she'd thought perhaps he felt something beyond mere kindness, but that didn't mean anything. He had his own life, his own journey, and yet there had been something in the way he looked at her over the fire last night, something in the way his hand had lingered at her waist when he helped her from Samson's back. Something that made her heart race and her breath catch. She changed into the dress Aunt Martha had left for her, a pretty green calico that complemented her eyes and pinned up her hair more neatly. Whatever happened next, she wanted to face it looking her best. Downstairs, she found Martha in the parlor, knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she worked on what appeared to be a baby blanket. "Isaac hasn't returned?" Jillian asked, trying to sound casual. Martha's eyes never left her work. Reunions take time, especially ones 5 years in the making. "Sit down, child, tell me what you're thinking." Jillian sank into a chair across from her aunt. "I don't know what I'm thinking," she admitted. "Everything's happened so quickly. 2 days ago, I was supposed to marry Edward, who clearly wasn't worthy of you," Martha interjected. "Perhaps not," Jillian agreed. "But it was the life I'd planned for. Now I don't know what comes next." "That's the beauty of it," Martha said, setting her knitting aside. "For perhaps the first time you get to decide what comes next." The words echoed Isaac's question from the night before. "What would you choose if you could?" "I'm afraid," Jillian confessed softly. "Of what?" "Of making the wrong choice. Of trusting the wrong person again." Martha leaned forward, her eyes kind but direct. "Life doesn't come with guarantees, Jillian. Every choice is a risk. But sometimes, the greater risk is in not choosing at all, in letting life happen to you instead of taking hold of it with both hands." Before Jillian could respond, there was a knock at the door. Martha rose to answer it, returning moments later with Isaac. He looked different, somehow lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. His eyes sought Jillian's immediately. "He remembered me," he said simply, his voice full of wonder. "After everything, he was glad to see me." Jillian felt her heart swell with happiness for him. "I'm so glad, Isaac." Martha discreetly excused herself, leaving them alone in the parlor. Isaac crossed the room to sit beside Jillian, taking her hands in his. "He wants me to stay," he said, "in Clearwater. He has a house with some land outside town, says there's room for me to build my own place if I want, or I could work with him at the smithy." He shook his head, still processing it all. "He has a wife, Jillian, and a little boy. I'm an uncle." "That's wonderful," she said sincerely. "You have a family again." "Yes," his eyes were intent on hers, "but there's something else I need to tell you, something I've been thinking about since the moment I saw you outside that chapel." Jillian's breath caught in her throat. "What is it?" "I've spent 5 years wandering, looking for something I couldn't quite name. I told myself it was Jacob, and part of it was. But even before that, I was searching." His thumbs traced gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "Yesterday, when you talked about the things you'd like to see and do, the ocean, the mountains, dancing under the stars, I realized something. I've seen those things, Jillian. I've experienced them. But they'd be so much more meaningful if I could share them with someone who was seeing them for the first time." Jillian's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must hear it. "Isaac, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that finding Jacob wasn't the end of my journey. It was just the beginning." He took a deep breath. "I know we've only known each other for 2 days. I know it's fast and probably crazy, but there's something between us, something I've never felt before, and I hope you feel it too." "I do," she whispered, hardly believing her own courage. "But I don't know what it means. What happens next?" Isaac smiled, that dimple appearing in his cheek. "That's the best part. We decide together. Maybe we stay in Clearwater for a while. Maybe we travel, see those sights you've dreamed of. Or maybe we find somewhere new, somewhere that can be ours." "Together," she said, testing the word, liking the feel of it on her tongue. "Together," he confirmed. "If that's what you want." Jillian thought about Silver Creek, about Edward, about the life she'd thought she was meant to have. Then she looked at Isaac, with his hopeful green eyes and his open heart, offering her not a predetermined path but the chance to create one with him. "Yes," she said, feeling as though she was stepping off a cliff and learning to fly all at once. "That's what I want." When Isaac kissed her, it felt like coming home to a place she'd never been before. His lips were gentle against hers, a promise rather than a demand. Jillian leaned into the kiss, into the future it represented, into the choice she was making with open eyes and a full heart. From the doorway, Aunt Martha watched with a satisfied smile before quietly slipping away to give them privacy. She'd tell Jillian later about the letter that had arrived that morning from Silver Creek, explaining how Edward Thompson had run off with the banker's daughter. She'd tell her how sometimes what seems like the worst moment of your life can lead to the best, if you're brave enough to follow where it leads. But for now, she left her niece to discover that truth for herself, in the arms of a wandering cowboy who'd found his reason to stay. 1 year later, Isaac and Jillian Xavier stood on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, watching as the sun dipped toward the horizon in a blaze of orange and gold. The journey from Clearwater to the California coast had been long, with stops along the way to see the wonders Jillian had dreamed of: the majestic Rockies, the vast deserts, the towering redwoods. "It's even more beautiful than I imagined," Jillian said, her hand held firmly in Isaac's. "Yes, it is," he agreed, though he was looking at her, not the ocean. The wind caught her hair, now cut shorter in a style that scandalized proper society but suited her adventurous spirit perfectly. She wore trousers more often than not these days, finding them practical for their travels, though she still enjoyed dressing up for special occasions. "Shall we?" Isaac asked, gesturing toward the beach below where they had laid out a blanket earlier. They made their way down the winding path to the shore. As the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky, Isaac took Jillian in his arms and began to sway, humming a waltz under his breath. "Dancing under the stars," she said with a smile of recognition. "You remembered." "I remember everything you've ever told me," he replied. "Every dream, every wish." They danced on the sand as the waves crashed nearby, two figures moving in perfect harmony against the backdrop of the vast ocean. Later, as they lay on the blanket looking up at the star-filled sky, Jillian thought about the unexpected turns her life had taken. The abandoned bride beside the chapel seemed like someone from another lifetime, a character in a book she had once read rather than the woman she had been. "Do you ever regret it?" Isaac asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Taking a chance on me that day," Jillian turned to face him, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "Never, not for a single moment." His smile was all the answer she needed. Tomorrow they would begin the journey back to Clearwater, where Jacob and his growing family waited, where Aunt Martha kept a room ready for their visits, where they had built a small cabin of their own on the edge of Jacob's property. It wasn't a permanent home, not yet, but it was a place to return to between adventures. For now, they had the stars above them, the ocean before them, and each other. It was more than enough. It was everything.